Our guest on This is America and the World is Dr. Lynn Bufka. Dr. Bufka holds a doctorate in psychology from Boston University, is Associate Chief of Practice Transformation and Quality at the American Psychological Association, and is in private practice in Silver Spring, Maryland. Dr. Bufka, good to be with you once again.
Thank you for having me once again.
When the pandemic first arrived, we were doing some programs on America's mental and emotional health, and here we are in COVID-3, kind of technically. How are we bearing up?
So, everything, whether it's APA, Stress in America, whether it's other sources, are saying people are reporting that they're stressed still, partly because of COVID, but now we've also got concerns about what's happening in terms of the economy. And of course, what's happening in Ukraine is really on people's minds.
So this anxiety and stress, how is it showing up in my life, in your life, the gang in the control room? How is it showing up imperceptibly, huh?
Yeah, it's really having a mixed effect on individuals. The people who've got pretty good support system, have flexibility with their work, perhaps are less exposed to some of the risks of the world, are in a better position than people who are feeling like they don't have a lot of control over what's happening, that they're having to respond in many ways to changes around mitigation strategies. So for those individuals, we're seeing a lot more difficulty with sleep, lower mood, potentially irritability, problems in relationships, those kinds of things.
When you look at different groups of people, say youngsters, teenagers, regular adults in the middle, seniors, who seems to be handling it best?
Older adults are really doing quite well in many ways. And I think part of that has to do with having gotten to that point in their life of they've seen a lot, they've learned how to deal with it and learn to cope. And they may not have quite as many demands. Adults, are struggling with sort of balancing perhaps both ends of the spectrum in the midst of uncertainty. And it's the young adults and the teens that are really struggling a lot more. This is the biggest challenge they've seen in their lifetimes for many of them. And the kinds of skills that we develop over time to deal with adversity and stress, they're still developing that, still testing it out in a time when their entire support system is feeling stressed, which makes it harder then to figure out, how do I handle a tough time? What do I do? Who do I lean on?
So probably parents and grandparents are watching us in conversation right now. What should they be looking for in teenagers, especially, that would indicate some trouble on the horizon?
Yeah, when we think about teens and young people, really a couple of things. One, changes in behavior. Are they doing things differently than they had been? Perhaps not engaging as much with you. And it's a little tricky, right? Because at that age in life, they're supposed to be separating from parents and being more independent. But I think that's one of the things, increased moodiness, irritability, those are important signs. One of the things that's so important when there's stable adults, caring adults in a young person's life, is to really try to create a space that feels open and non-judgmental, so that people can talk about anything. So don't try to force a conversation necessarily, but allow time and space to make that happen. So spend time with the teen doing activities you enjoy, or going on walks in nature where there's opportunity to have conversation. And perhaps you don't go at it directly like, what's wrong with you today? But there's lots going on in the world. Anything you want to talk about? How are things happening with your friends? Maybe a way to get into the conversation to find out what's going on.
Are kids still having a difficult time going back into school now? And some are wearing masks, some are not wearing masks. It's kind of confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the part that's really hard, is that it's confusing. And why are rules different in different areas? What are the expectations? That can be really hard. And as a scientist myself, I understand that data emerges and evolves, and that informs the decisions that public health officials are making. But not everybody knows that and understands the rationale for it. So one of the things that's really helpful, to the extent that schools and families try to keep things as consistent as possible, make it clear when a change is happening, why it's happening, and what the expectation is, and try to get kids to doing the things that are sort of most typical of that era. The masks, some kids like them, some don't, but being together seems to be really, really important with teens. And so finding ways to foster that reduces the public health stress as much as possible is going to be critical.
Let us take a little break talking with Dr. Lynn Bufka. She's a psychologist in private practice in the Maryland area, Silver Spring area. She's also on the team at the American Psychological Association, organization I respect a great deal. Take a little break. Back on the other side, This is America and the World. This is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, 21st Century Citizenship, the Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman Foundation, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotendaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy. Dr. Bufka, we're kind of on news overload, aren't we, as far as not only the COVID and mixed messages coming on what we should do, what we shouldn't do, the war in Ukraine, as you've just mentioned. A lot of politics is in the mix, a lot of polarization. Put all that together, that adds to the stress and anxiety, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think one of the things that's important for all of us to learn is we don't have to be plugged in all the time. Mm-hmm. So learning to step away from news, take some breaks from news really is helpful, because it's hard to absorb information when it's a constant stream. We may not start to differentiate what's new, what we need to know. Mm-hmm. So taking some breaks can be really, really valuable in an era when there's just 24/7 availability. But then it also gets really complicated because it's hard to differentiate what's actually news, facts that we need to pay attention to, and where opinion starts filtering in. And that's where some of the polarization happens, when very different points of view are in play that may conflict with some of our own viewpoints and really get at the heart of some of our values. And that's when it becomes important, again, to take a step back, try to sift through what is the information I need to have here, and how do I separate out sort of what somebody else's opinion is. Mm-hmm. What do I need to know to make decisions for me and my next steps? Those are all important considerations right now.
I've heard this. A lot of families, a lot of friendships are fraying because of this polarized society we're in. How do you navigate that? You know, if you're in conflict with someone who's a friend or family member who holds a different political point of view, say, for the sake of our conversation, how do you navigate that? Maybe living in the same house together, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there are examples of folks who have very different points of view who manage to stay married, right? But I think for a lot of us, it's a new era to really see our political points of view sort of out there in front of everybody and in stark contrast. I think when we peel away some of the viewpoints, we find that underneath it, we have a lot of shared values. We want good things for our families. We want our kids to do well in school, to thrive, to grow into adulthood, to be successful. But we might have very different ideas about how to get there. Mm-hmm. And that's some of the polarization that we see. So I really encourage people to try to find those underlying common values and start there, as acknowledging that here's what we can agree on as we think about where we are in the world and what we're trying to do. And another thing that's really important is trying to not just walk in and convince somebody that your point of view is right. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong. It instantly sets people up as being defensive. We do a much better job if we can say, I really don't understand where you're coming from on this. Can you help me learn? What is it I need to know? Invites more conversation as opposed to throwing down one fact and a counterfact and really escalating a conflict.
So if the conflict is there, you want to put us in a kind of a questioning position. What can I learn? What am I missing? What am I missing kind of question.
Exactly. And you may decide it's not, I don't want to know. You may decide that, and you may have to come to an agreement that we can't talk about certain things in a way that's going to be comfortable. But are there other things that we do agree on? Do we find that we can talk about gardening or playing cards together and enjoy our company in those ways, and realize that the person isn't entirely this polar opposite, that there are things that you do share in common.
So this just went through my mind, and I'm going to toss it at you. If you had to conduct a workshop up on Capitol Hill for Congress, and you had the Democrats here and the Republicans there, and they're at each other's throats for the most part, how would you begin to talk with them? Or what would you put out there on the table? I just am interested to see how you'd handle a situation like that. Dr. Lynn Bufka is with us today, and she's going to talk to the Democrats and the Republicans together. You're going to talk to them together. What would you say?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, part of me just wants to say, would you knock it off? Would you listen to each other? And would you decide what do you think is important for the country? I feel like when we talk about politics so often, we're forgetting why we got into those roles to begin with. And that sometimes it becomes about maintaining the position as opposed to thinking about acting on behalf of the people I'm acting on. So I'd really try to get people to get to that place of who are you acting for? What do you see are the values? Can you identify values that both share? They may not rate them as equally important. Fiscal conservatism might be more important, and social supporting people who are under-resourced and don't have their needs met might be more important on another side of the aisle. But most of us in our households think a balanced budget's important. So how do you balance those two different points of view to move towards a goal of a balanced budget for the country or equitable spending for the country? So those become sort of the dilemmas.
So if I understand you correctly, your key question is, what do you both see as important for the country?
Exactly.
And try to work on that and almost set the politics aside and see if you can come to two or three things that are important for both sides. Is that right?
Absolutely. And oftentimes you can find things that are important about one issue that both sides will agree on. When you think about the huge debates over abortion, almost everybody wants the children who are born to have a decent life. Can we start there to think about what's needed there that might potentially do some great things to prevent unwanted pregnancies, and for the people who are in the position of not sure what to do with their pregnancy, to have resources for afterwards? Can we start with that as opposed to having the debate about abortion? That may be one way to have a more common vision of what's needed to move forward. So it's sort of changing the problem a little bit.
Let me ask you this question. It seems that therapists nowadays are like overbooked. I mean, to find a therapist is very, very difficult. What resources are out there for people who want some help, need some help, but are having trouble finding a therapist or a counselor?
Yeah, it is particularly hard right now because there's increased demand, and therapists themselves are feeling stressed and can't expand, beyond a reasonable point to meet the needs, right? I'm not going to provide good care if I'm so stressed I'm not paying attention to my own needs. So in terms of resources, we always encourage people to talk to people they trust, whether it's a physician, a primary care provider, family members or friends, members of the clergy, to get some recommendations. But again, we know lots of clinicians in the community don't have openings. So other things to consider might be looking for group options, whether it's support groups through an organization that might work with people who've lost someone to suicide or to an early death, or an Alzheimer's support group. Those may be places to get some important support services. If you're in a larger community where there's a university, you may find a training clinic available where you'd be working with a student, but someone who is going to be very supervised. So you're going to get good quality care. That may make it a little bit more affordable even in those situations. And we're really in an era where there's a lot of tech options emerging. It may be hard to sift through and find the good ones, but there are apps that are out there that are being developed to help people improve their sleep, to get a handle on anxiety. And so looking into some of that can be really useful too, as sort of a initial preliminary step before getting into therapy, or even as an adjunct as you're between sessions, can be really useful.
Is the jury still out on online therapy versus in-person therapy?
So we know very clearly that virtual therapy, Zoom therapy, like we're having this interview, can be just as effective as in-person therapy. And we knew that before the pandemic too. But the question at the time was, could we ramp it up and scale it up to meet the need? And it seems that we really have during the pandemic. So that's one plus out of this. It doesn't solve everything, because not everyone has broadband access. Not everybody can find that therapist. But it certainly is an effective tool. So if you're looking at options that would be video only, and even audio only, can be successful therapy. That's important to know.
Isn't it so important, if you're experiencing something, to just reach out to someone and talk? I always thought that, if you're building up a lot of tension or anxiety or stress, it's kind of like a balloon that's going, bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can break, it can burst. But just talking about stuff is so helpful with a friend or a colleague, or with kids with their parents, huh?
Absolutely. Getting support from loved ones, from your network, is critical. And we know that makes a huge difference. The people who tell us that they are more stressed also are the ones who tell us they have a much smaller social network, a much smaller support network. So absolutely, get support from others. I think one of the challenges right now is that some of us feel like our support networks are also stressed. So how do we navigate that without feeling like we're burdening somebody else? But that can be done. You can allow yourself some time. I really just want to have somebody listen right now. And after 20 or 30 minutes of listening, maybe we decide that we're going to do something that we enjoy together, and build up some good feelings in that way as well. But it does really help to know that somebody's there in your corner with you.
What is bringing people into therapy now, if they can get an appointment? What are the big things you're seeing?
Just as it has been for decades. I mean, depression and anxiety are the things that often bring people into therapy. And we're still seeing that. We're just seeing more of it, unfortunately. But in addition, this era has triggered particular anxieties related to health, related to illness, because we've had a brand new illness that nobody knew about. And how to manage that has been really a new concern for many individuals. And then certainly parents and teens and children, some of the stresses and changes of adapting to all of the changes with school, and how do I form my social networks, has prompted more individuals to look for therapy for themselves or for their kids. But we're seeing just more people requesting care for many of the same kinds of problems that people have struggled with for a long time. It's just harder to manage when there's more stressors in your life.
I've read some articles that suggest more abuse, both verbal and physical abuse, not talking about sexual abuse. Drinking seems to have gone up during the pandemic, and people talk about weight gain during the pandemic. Are those things that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, so we definitely are seeing people. So when it comes to verbal and physical abuse, absolutely, there are more concerns about that, partly because there are fewer outlets for people to escape to. So if you're in a lockdown situation, the tensions are there. You may not be able to feel like you can leave the setting and allow things to diffuse. So absolutely, we have been concerned about the increase in intimate partner violence and the implications for that. That has definitely been a concern. It's been harder for people to reach out and get help, though, because oftentimes they're with the abuser even more than pre-pandemic because of some of these efforts to try to contain spread of a virus, but it has also kept people together when they shouldn't be. In terms of substance use and weight gain, we're seeing people turning to substances or using food in ways that aren't so healthy for them, as they either sort of try to cope with the overwhelming experiences that they're having, or perhaps have gone away from actually their healthy behaviors and have kind of lapsed into not so healthy behaviors. So we're definitely seeing more people reporting struggle with that. We've also seen the flip, where people who are drinking and using substances less because they're not in those social groups, or they're feeling so stressed that they're not eating. So we're seeing people with unexpected and undesired weight loss as well.
Where do you draw a line between behavior that may be attributable to trying to cope with the pandemic and crossing a line where it's an addiction? What's your barometer?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, it really is when it starts to interfere, where it's impacting your health in many ways. So if we're talking about substances beyond, where a person is becoming intoxicated on a regular basis, or they say, oh, I'm not going to have anything to drink today, but then they find they just really can't stop it and they go ahead and do that. Or they might have a big interview with This Is America, but decide they need to have a drink beforehand. Things that really are bad judgments in many ways that could impair their performance. One of the things where it gets particularly tricky around addiction is people will then start to hide it, and it can become even harder to see.
You know, what went through my mind right now was the slap heard around the world. Did you, as a psychologist, did you kind of look at that? How did you size it up?
I didn't see it when it happened. I saw it afterwards when people were already beginning to talk about it. You know, and it was just so many different takes on it. You know, a bit shocking to see that happen. Was it actually, now that we know it was not scripted, because that was sort of the initial question, right? Is it about sensitivity and really defending for being sensitive to his wife's concerns? But it's interesting to me, I've not heard a lot about what Will Smith's wife, Jada, has said about all of it. And I think that would really be more important to know, that it's her response to what was said and how she handled it, to me, I think is really critical. And it concerns me when he felt he needed to step in and do that. She's an adult and could manage it her way as well. And I think that's something we really want to pay attention to. It's not necessarily, it may look like, wow, he's defending his wife, but really there was something that he was doing for him. I'm not sure that she was asking him to step up there and do that. And so it does make me concerned about where he was coming from when all that occurred.
Where do you see the hope in the world right now and in our daily lives?
You know, I do see hope. I am a hopeful person, but I find it in different ways. For instance, an organization that is a local organization that has worked with children in this community and put together art packages for them, has partnered with a Ukrainian church to put together art packages to send to kids in Ukraine. To me, that was incredibly hopeful, because it was people reaching out and saying, I see you and I know you're in need and I want to be helpful. So that's one sign. But when I see signs of kindness and growth, and I think we're in such a beautiful time of year with springtime coming and seeing new things emerging, to me, that is hopeful.
You're a psychologist and you're a human being. What's the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
I've learned a lot of lessons in my life. I think one of the things that's been really important for me to learn is I can't control everything. And I need to recognize what's within my control. And a lot of times what's within my control is how I react and how I respond to situations. And how I react and how I respond to situations often influences how I feel about it. So if I choose to be angry, Sometimes I need to be angry because there's things that really require you to be angry. Injustice, feeling taken advantage of, it can spur you to action. But if I react angrily and it doesn't spur me to action and I sit with it inside, it doesn't help me feel any better. Or feeling anxious about what's happening in the world. I can't control a lot of things in the world, but I can control where I go, how I interact, whether I wear a mask or not. So I try to focus on what I have control over, whether it's my actions or my responses. And that really helps me to enter the world in a place where I'm not necessarily feeling as buffeted or tossed around or anxious or angered by what's happening around me.
Thank you. What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Dr. Bufka, good to be with you once again.
Thank you.
For information about This is America and the World, visit our YouTube channel, This is America TV, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, 21st Century Citizenship, the Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman Foundation, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotendaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy.